Hello, everybody. My name is Lush Eisner, and welcome to the Canadian Money Talk, the channel about Canadian investing and personal finance. Please like and subscribe. I record 2 videos per week, so make sure you ring the notification bell to get notified each time one comes out. I have been traveling for the past 3 months from August the 9th to November 15th in the Far East and Southeast Asia. I started in Japan and finished in Singapore, 77 miles from the equator. To keep it on the channel's topic, the costs for this 14-week trip have been reasonable, totaling about $9,700 Canadian. But most of the countries are considered inexpensive to live in, and some financially independent people use a so-called geographic arbitrage to live cheaply in these countries. So I took 4 flights, 3 of them two-leg. So that was about $2,000. The hotels over the 14 weeks cost about $4,000. All the other expenses, including vaccinations, food, tourist expenses, museums, and ground travels, that went on to a credit card were $2,500. And then I had 1,000 US for cash spending where they didn't take credit cards. So I would just convert US dollars to the local currency, which was well received. I also paid 300 Canadian for a tailored suit in Vietnam and a little bit over 700 for a dental crown in Thailand. So this was 40% of what that crown would have cost in Canada. I traveled on my own, booking hotels, buses, trains, and planes as required, almost always online. I had some fun with logistics. How to get everywhere. Where's the hotel? Where does the bus from the other city drop me off? Where's the city center for history? And where's the party center? So, for example, in Bangkok, I was in the wrong center, despite what the hotel description said. I was in the tourist party sector rather than the history center, which was about 10 kilometers to the west. I could have prevented some of my issues by having roaming on my phone to have data, but that was $15 a day, and I was not willing to pay that. But I would have been able to make calls to my bank, and instead of using Google Maps and walking, I could have taken taxi. So I could have made my life a little bit easier. I did enjoy the food on the trip very much. I ate local street food for the most part. If the menu was in English, that was probably for tourists and not for me. But I suspect that I enjoyed the food because for the previous 5 years prior to the trip, I had been on the keto diet, so I could not have any carbohydrates. I went off of keto to be able to go on the trip. And so now I could have all the rice and all the noodles. So that I think made the food a lot better. I have to confess to being a bad flyer. On the way back, there was 14 hours of turbulence from Singapore to San Francisco coming home, and that certainly didn't help make me a better flyer. I had an overnight bus trip in Thailand, which I very much disliked. So I actually ended up in an ad hoc fashion booking an extra flight to avoid a 2 day bus trip south through Thailand. And that extra flight, or actually 2 legs of a flight, seemed like a really good idea right up until the time the plane was taxiing for takeoff. So, still not a good flyer and still do not enjoy that. So, let's look at the countries where I went. Let's start chronologically. But the two expensive countries that would take credit cards were Japan and Korea. So I flew into Tokyo from Vancouver via Calgary, and I found Japan, I have to confess, pretty unwelcoming. People were super polite, but they weren't friendly and they weren't helpful. And I found myself standing in lineups hoping that I was in the right lineup and that they would take credit cards for whatever it is that I needed. On the plus side, I took the Shinkansen high-speed trains, which were amazing. So I did get that benefit. Otherwise, I think a week that I spent in Tokyo was too much, and the 2 weeks in Japan, I weren't really a good start to my trip. Then I took the ferry over to Korea for a week. I found Korea welcoming, but the people weren't always polite. The other interesting thing was a heavy army presence that I found. So the conflict with North Korea always seems to be in the foreground. After that, I flew from Seoul down to Vietnam. So moving on to the less expensive countries where I spent most of my time. The difficulty was that they did not take credit cards everywhere, and so I had to depend on my $1,000 of U.S. currency, which was gold. So starting in Vietnam for a couple of weeks, uh, the traffic laws or people's ignorance of them was just amazing. Like it was just a free for all chaos. Red lights didn't matter to anybody, crosswalks did not matter to anybody. So that was a bit of a culture shock when I arrived. Hordes of motorbikes driving right at you and then missing you by a couple of inches. I didn't really see much economic activity from an investing point of view. Everything was a little dirty. There was just rocks on the ground, rubble, garbage. Even in tourist areas, it really wasn't a country which seemed to cater to tourists. I did get a nice tailored suit for $300 Canadian. The other thing that struck me in Vietnam was uh, the government style is communist, and having been born in Eastern Europe, there were a lot of things I recognized from my childhood, and not in a good way. On the plus side, Vietnam was quite inexpensive. You could get a meal for a couple of dollars, uh, haircut for $2.50. It was quite nice that way. Uh, I hit three cities. I did not enjoy Hanoi nor Saigon, but in the middle was the very historical city of Hue, which I enjoyed very much. Also stayed in the only four-star hotel of my entire journey, and they did anything to help me. They printed things for me. They were great. So that's what 4 stars gives you, and I think it was $25 Canadian per night in that hotel. But I did enjoy that historical city quite a bit, and I walked to so many temples and to so many historical places. Next came Cambodia, and that was interesting from an economic point of view because I think they were doing something similar to what China has been doing. There's lots of building, there's lots of construction, lots of things being built, but then there's also a lot of empty and abandoned buildings. So I think they're building things probably with foreign money, and they're building it just to keep the GDP up, but it's not being used. In Cambodia, I did enjoy Angkor, which is a UNESCO heritage site. The whole area has dozens, if not hundreds, of temples, all old and not restored or anything like that, but they were still interesting. And I rented a bike for 7 days, and I got a 7 day ticket to go to all the temples, and they do check your ticket, interestingly enough. And so for 7 days, I biked around and enjoyed that very much, even though I was afraid the bike, which was much nicer than the ones I have in Canada, would get stolen once I locked it up to actually go into the temple. Next came Thailand, which as a country seemed to be making good progress and seemed to be the most advanced out of the ones that I had visited, other than Japan and Korea. Uh, Quite a bit of technology, great history, and everything was kept up. Things were new, things were clean. This is where I got the dental work done, a crown on a tooth that had a root canal, and it cost about a third of what it would in Canada. And my dentist in Canada was not all that happy that I got it done somewhere else. So, to prevent a 2 day bus ride south, because all the interesting stuff was in the north, I took a 2 leg flight from northern Thailand down to Malaysia. And on the layover in Bangkok, I discovered airport lounges, which were wonderful. In Thailand, in the smaller cities especially, the hotels were super cheap and amazing, and food was so cheap. So if I were to travel around Asia and as a long-term uh, travel destination, Thailand would be the way to go. So I flew into Malaysia. Malaysia has a lot of history, but mostly World War II, and then the colonist times, so kind of since 1600s and so on. They were occupied by so many different countries. It wasn't funny. The 5:30 a.m. loudspeakers of prayers from the mosques were a little disconcerting, so I didn't really enjoy that. And Malaysia had surprisingly good trains, so I did like that. And finally, which was expensive, but also took credit cards, was Singapore, where I just took the bus from Malaysia to Singapore. Singapore, I just spent a week in. There were laws about everything. It's a small island, great food, and I had the opportunity to attend a Remembrance Day ceremony at a war cemetery because there was a big battle between the British and some colonials and Japanese in World War II. So I took a tour and that was quite interesting. So I did this trip, this 14-week trip, because I was thinking if I didn't go now, I wouldn't go. I had traveled all over North America. Being born in Europe, I had done Europe a lot as well. And I was interested in seeing Asia. And so this was my trip. The trip was long. It was designed to get over jet lag once and not have to fly back and forth a lot. So that's why it was all in one piece, and there were only one design flight, but then I did an extra flight, as I mentioned. So it was supposed to minimize jet lag and minimize flying. It was certainly an experience, but I would say to me it was not worth the logistics and the hassles along the way. There were some places which were quite stressful. Just trying to find a way around. You don't have local cash, you don't speak the language. If you arrive somewhere and it's 7 or 8 o'clock at night, everything is closed and you don't know how to get to your hotel. You don't have the local currency. Once I had to run out with my suitcase out of the train station and go across into Chinatown to get local currency and then come back in order to be able to buy a train ticket. So things like that just did not really make it fun for me. And so it was certainly an experience, probably one that I am not going to be repeating. So this had been a video a little bit off topic, but it did involve some money matters. If you have any requests on what you'd like me to cover in future videos, please put that into the comment section. If you'd like to get in touch, please reach out on any of the social media channels, and may you have a profitable day.